Welcome to Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. And today we have a return of a special guest, Dean Pinter from Dean Pinter Buyers Agents Newcastle. And he's talking about killer auction strategies for beginner buyers. So if you are heading to an auction, or if you've got an auction in your horizon and haven't had a lot of experience, as most of us don't, it's not something that we do every day, unlike Dean, this is an awesome episode to let you know what you need to organise beforehand, how to understand how the auction might go ahead of time by doing some due diligence, the importance of the due diligence and the different facets you need to look at, all the way through to reading the room and strategies to try and blow the competition out of the water. Dean gives some really good insights into what he's seen transpire over the years and some really great detail on some of those auctions that have gone a little bit off script and off plan. He gives some fantastic insights that I'd recommend to anyone that's heading to auction. I'm sure everyone will get something out of it. Here's Dean. Dean Pinter, thanks for joining me back on Geared for Growth.
Oh, good day, Mike. Happy to be here. Good to see you.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and it hasn't been that long between drinks. We had you late last year with a different topic, but you proposed a few different ones, and one of the ones I thought is definitely worth getting you back, and that is killer auction strategies for beginner buyers or people that might be attending their first auction with an idea of buying, or they don't have a tremendous amount of experience. It can be very, very overwhelming, and of course the legislation's different state to state. We'll focus majority on what happens in New South Wales today. The one that I want to kick off with that comes up all the time is price guides. My advice to anyone attending an auction, if they were to ask for it, is firstly, talk to someone like yourself who's more qualified than me. But secondly, throw the price guide in the bin. Really, like, you need to do your own comparative guide. I mean, that the price guide seems to be less of a useful tool and more of a strategy of the auction campaign. Would you say that's reasonable or a bit unfair to agents?
No, I think it's reasonable. I think, we're in a particular time frame where price guides have come into the spotlight a little bit. Fair trading are looking at it a little bit more diligently because agents, when there is a lack of stock on the market, as there is now, going into 225, and that may change, but for now it is low stock. And I think the price guides are a tool that's often used to create more interest, obviously, and to get more people through the door, for agents to meet more people, etc. So I don't think, it's a good point you make. Don't get too excited by a price guide. I tend to tell people, don't look at the lower price guide, look at where the higher price guide is, i.e. 850 to 980. Definitely look towards the 9 to 980 section of the guide, more so than the lesser. And certainly comes back to due diligence. Doing your best you can with your comparables, using your various websites that's available to you, and doing as much due diligence as you can, which comes for any property purchase, not just auction, but auction particularly because it's a time frame you're working to, and on the day people can get a little bit overawed by the whole situation. So yeah, definitely do your own price guide comparisons prior.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to sort of challenge out there, and I think you've got some evidence to support this, is the notion of transparency. I know that government agencies, for example, if they are disposing of property, many of them are mandated that it must be an auction campaign rather than private treaty, because it removes that ability for internal people to be, snapping these things up without a proper marketed campaign, whereas auction is public. You go out there, everyone goes to the room or to the property itself, and everyone has a reasonable and fair opportunity to buy the property. But things aren't always as they seem, are they, Dean?
Well, look, I'm a great fan of auction because of the so-called transparency you mentioned. And it is probably the most open and fairest way of transacting property, whether that be in rooms or on site. You certainly do get to see your competition, and although there is many games at play sometimes, it is a very transparent way of transacting. However, I will say a point that I bring to some of my clients' attentions, and I'm sure some listeners will find this interesting. So, is auction as transparent as you think? Well, maybe not. And I say this because to do your due diligence prior, you should have a legal representative or a legal team definitely looking over the contract prior to even considering buying any property. That's a given. But what happens in that situation is that let's just bring it back to 6 registrations at any given auction. Are those 6 registrations all equal? Are you all standing there with a checkbook in the pocket ready to play? Well, you are. However, each buyer could be playing under different conditions regarding that contract, i.e., has the solicitor asked for a longer settlement, a shorter settlement, some type of delay? Has the legal team asked for certain points of the contract to be deleted or added? Now, out of those 6 buyers, there could be 5 different situations. The buyer who turns up and is, they got the advice that the contract's fine, and they just turn up thinking that's fine, that's okay too. But there is many different avenues a legal team can do to support their client. So it's interesting that out of a potential 6 buyers, 5 of them could be bidding under different conditions, and you will never know.
Right.
That is not made public. So as transparent as auction should and can be, that's a part of it that isn't overly transparent, where you're thinking you're sticking to the contract and the buyer next to you could have made 25 changes to the contract, which usually, is it a 5, a 10% deposit, a smaller deposit, and settlement periods, and then, some contracts are 180 pages long. There could be many, many changes to the contract, which you or, the others may not know about. So not exactly transparent in that respect, but very transparent in the fact that whoever puts their hand up last tends to get the property.
So my understanding is that when you're bidding at auction, you're bidding on the contract. There's one contract that goes with that transaction, but you're sort of saying that buyers can have pre-agreements through that vendor solicitor and their solicitor or conveyancer to say, when we bid at auction, this is our version of the contract, or we want you to agree to these terms, and they can say yes. So when they're actually bidding for something, it could be actually different to what you're bidding. It could have more favourable conditions, and to them be worth another $10,000 perhaps because of a settlement period.
And that it's a great point you make, and that's exactly right. Like for my clients, without getting into great detail, then if it's a renovator's dream or it depends what the product is as well. And that could mean tens of thousands of dollars, i.e. early access clauses if the place is vacant, deceased estates. There's many, we could talk for hours on that particular point in itself. But like you say, you're not all, it can change the way a person looks towards how much money they spend and how cautious they are with the ability to negotiate some of those terms on the contract, because that could mean early access. And early access for a lot of people, that can save, you're basically getting the home mortgage free for a small period of time. Now, normally you can't do structural work within that period of time. So normally, unless the home is obviously in a state of disrepair or something, but generally speaking, you're allowed to do cosmetic changes, which once again, if you're repainting, recarpeting and doing all sorts of things, it can add some weight at the end, which could mean $10,000 or $20,000 difference between what someone's willing to pay and willing not to. So, I just thought I'd raise that point because it's quite interesting that a lot of people, don't understand that, different buyers have different contractual terms that they're buying.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting one. Early access could be quite beneficial to the new purchaser, and that could sort of be priced into the amount that they're willing to pay for it, and you're not necessarily aware of that.
Yeah.
Before we start talking about the strategies once the always shiny suited auctioneer starts doing his or her little spiel, what do we need to make sure is in order before auction day, before we get our little paddle?
Yeah.
The usual suspects apply, I assume. We've talked about making sure you've got your comparables right, so you know the range of where it's likely to happen. Pest and building, I suppose, is an obvious one. You know, the contract review with your solicitor or conveyancer is an obvious one. Checking for any easements or covenants or overlays with bushfire and flood. What have I missed, Dean? What are some of the key things?
Yeah, well, certainly you've mentioned the majority of the key things. My biggest rule I tell people, and if we're just in a conversation and they haven't engaged me as such to represent them at auction, I tell them don't make the auction the property you're keen to buy, don't make that the first auction you attend.
Right.
Go to various auctions, hopefully within the area. That would be ideal. But that's why I'm quite busy, is because people just don't have the time, to get out to and see so many auctions. But
yep.
I would ask that, when I'm giving general advice, that they get out to as many auctions as they can, preferably with the auctioneer that may be auctioneering the property they're interested in.
Yep.
And for a point of most small towns, bigger towns, there's not an unlimited range of auctioneers. Like Newcastle has about 8 full-time, and out of those full-time, about 4 work as an agent and an auctioneer, so it's a dual role. So there's only 3 or 4 full-time auctioneers in the greater Newcastle area. Personally, over 20 years, I could have possibly been head-to-head with these guys for 50 times each. So you get to really know how an auctioneer works as well. And I don't expect the general person to delve too deep into that, but it is a very good point to make that all auctioneers are different. Some are very quick with the hammer, some drag it out, some, love the theatre, and some are there to just quickly get this property sold. And there's all sorts of different variations of that. And the more you can get to, the more comfortable you feel, and then break it down into strategies and different scenarios on what may present on the given day.
Have you seen a poorly dressed auctioneer as yet? I haven't seen any of them. They are the shiniest human beings alive from my perspective.
Yeah, look, there's some, it's gone to new levels over the last few years, like most things in life, and it's a competitive industry. But generally speaking, they've got a job to do, and they're there for a portion of time. A lot of auctioneers may have 8 auctions booked in that day. So time is of the essence. They're not there to spend an hour going back and forward. They are there to get a result as quick as they can. There's a word of caution to buyers out there with a little bit of inexperience, particularly when there's not so many registrations at auctions. And I see it quite regularly where, I might not be representing a buyer, and I hold my head when they say, guys, the bid's in your favour. Can we walk inside and have a chat? Right. It always worries me, because some of the auctioneers are very skilled negotiators, previous selling agents. So they've got a lot of tools in the tool bag to bring out extra offers and make it feel like there's a lot of competition happening on the day, when in fact you could be the only registered buyer there, or the only serious buyer, because obviously not every registered buyer tends to put their hand in the air. So one of my strategies is getting there early if I can, if I'm representing a buyer, and understanding my competition, and also seeing how many registrations are there. Now, that's always not easy. Some people like to protect the amount. Others are happy to hand out cards and go from 1 to 12 and, make it known that there's lots of competition. So there's a lot of mini strategies involved, but I do like to know who I'm up against on the day. Am I up against, what seems like experienced buyers, developers, and that all comes back to the type of property. But always nice to know in any field, and that will predict my strategy, is if I'm going to open up early, hold till the last minute. And there's various strategies we can employ on the day, pending that last minute, how many registrations and all of that sort of thing.
If an untrained buyer came to you with a strategy to say, look, Dean, I'm going to do X on the day. My first bid's going to be at this point in the auction. It's going to be this price. Like, typically, how would you categorize that? Do people tend to sort of say, oh, I'm going to just be the first one come in low, or I'm going to wait right till the end, till I've got maybe 10 or 20K to go, and they'll assume that maybe I'm just starting, so I've got heaps of room. Do people gravitate to a strategy despite the conditions?
Look, I see it all the time, and I personally, it's I come in with various strategies ready to go when I know who the auctioneer is and all my due diligence has been done. And I can use that in various ways. What I see out there with the inexperienced is they like to, suggest that there's a bargain at hand here. And most of the times, and I tell them, there is no bargains anymore.
Yeah.
And if there is a bargain, there's something very wrong with the property, meaning, like you mentioned, easements, it could go on and on why a property's not popular. But even then, we're finding, particularly, I'll bring it back to the Newcastle area, there is no bargains. So, a lot of people open up and the guide is, 750 to 950, say, and not many people open up at 950, although you do get the odd person that I see in experience that go hard and try and blow away a lot of the competition early, which is a particular strategy. I personally don't sign on to that one too often. I like to work through an auction. But at the same time, starting at, with the 600, a lot of auctioneers won't even accept it, but it just drags out things. And, and then you have things like the vendor bid, which I wanted to discuss with you briefly.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because a lot of people don't understand the process around a vendor bid either.
Well, you used to be able to just sort of fly pretty fast and loose. You could have a koala eating a leaf in a tree and you could take that down as 10 grand. But things have been tightened up a little bit since then. And, the auctioneer has the right to declare a bid on the vendor's behalf. And typically I assume that they would be doing that to kind of get us either close to or past the reserve. Is that, what rights do they have, and typically why would they do that? The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
A vendor bid is used exactly like you say. It's if an auction's slow or if we're too far away from the reserve, a vendor bid can be used. And like you said, make no mistake, a vendor bid is not the reserve. It doesn't have to be anywhere near the reserve. It's just to encourage more activity. Obviously, it's usually higher than the interest shown on the day, or if there's no interest but there's lots of registration and everyone's just sitting on their hands, a vendor bid can cut through, so to speak, and just stop wasting the time. And for those people, unfortunately, that have bought into the low price guide or a price guide, whether it's low or not, unfortunately, they almost walk away on the spot too when most vendor bids, because they still, the experience isn't there and they still feel there's an odd chance they may just pick up a bargain today. So I think the vendor bid, is used quite often in a slower market just to encourage some activity. But by no means, even if you go with the vendor bid, that doesn't mean anything in great detail. And then we have the scenario where people go, are we on the market yet? And auctioneers take that in various ways. Some simply say, they rarely say no, but they might say, oh, I'll let you know when it's on the market, or I'll get to that point, or they ignore it altogether because it's their job to keep the action flowing as well. They're good with the discussion, keep the discussion flowing so people don't walk away, and also at the same time, contributing to getting a better price for the vendor. So when you can ask the question, is a home on the market? Normally they'll tell you, obviously, when they've reached a certain whether it's the reserve. And then we have the other option for people that I think they'll find interesting today that are listening is can a reserve be changed on the day? And yes, it can. And, there's been examples in history of agents turning up with more than one reserve letter, particularly for vendors who aren't in the country. They may want to have an option there where if things, they have one reserve here and then here and then here. So, they can get the job done on the day and they're not searching for signatures and making phone calls on the day to try and lower the reserve. Yeah. Obviously, it's ideal that all parties are there on the day where we can have discussions and make a decision. But there's, so reserve letters can also be crossed out and rechanged on the day.
Yep.
So and sometimes an agent may in fact show a reserve letter to a potential buyer and say, I'm afraid this is the reserve letter, we're $100,000 away, what do you want to do? Yep. Now, is that reserve letter the actual reserve letter? Yes. These are the little tricks of the trade, and it comes, you only learn that stuff. I wouldn't expect anyone out there going to their first auction to understand, but this is the nuance that is auction, and is it an actual transparent part of real estate?
So always give the auctioneer a pat down and see how many letters they got in the pocket. Hearing that first from Dean Pinter.
Never proven. I won't say, I've seen it, I've heard of it. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Never seen it, but I believe it's been used occasionally. So, but seriously, it all comes back to due diligence, and I would like to make a point about. I tell my guys, or particularly those just seeking, that they should have three prices in mind when going to an auction. They have a price that is simply too good to be true, where there's no even thought of not putting the hand in the air at that particular level. Then there's that middle ground where, you know what, I think it's worth it. I will go that high. I think the property has the potential, it suits my needs, it ticks enough boxes, etc. And then you have that maximum price. And I do say that people should be fairly consistent in the fact that if it reaches that, the hands go in the pocket.
Yeah.
There is small examples, Mike, of suggesting that, you don't want to miss out on a property for a few $1,000s. But then we've got pre-approvals in place as well, where simply you cannot. You haven't got the facilities there to bid more than that amount of money. So we need to understand that. But at the same time, for me, I'm representing clients. They come to me in usually a reasonably frustrated state, or they're very busy people, and they don't want to, go on to 15, 20 auctions before they get a property either. So, it is a balancing act. But I always do mention, you should have three distinct price points, and certainly have a maximum that you're not willing to extend past, because I do see it quite often when I'm just at an auction, not representing. I do see people getting quite carried away, emotional on the day. You've got support, you've got family members saying, do, don't, it's great, it's this. You've got the auctioneer saying, come on, mate, what do you want to do? This is an incredible opportunity. You've got, and I do see people put the hand up in the air when they probably should keep them in the pocket.
Mm-hmm. We talked about doing the due diligence on the auctioneer and ideally seeing them in their natural environment, getting an idea of their cadence, their catchphrases, maybe some tells as to where the auction is up to on a particular property. But how best do we do our sort of due diligence on the attendees at the auction? Another word for that would be, say, reading the room, assuming the auction's in a room. But how do we read the room or read the crowd and use that to our advantage when we're talking strategy?
Yeah, for me personally, and for those listening, I there's obviously been doing this for so long, you get to read people fairly well. So you can put a person in a particular box, and I do, and that may be just wandering around having a chat to people. Nothing stopping you going, hey guys, I've seen you registered today, and it's just general chat. A lot of people will keep their cards close to the chest. I like to know my competition, and from that point of view, I'd like to know, are they really inexperienced? That's what I'm looking for. And whether it's a mum, dad, or a dad with the daughter, and I get to pick it pretty easily as to how I'm going to strategize against them, particularly when I know how many people I'm up against on the day. And knowing that there's a small percentage that won't partake, and that will change my strategy as to whether I come in very strong quite early and continue the bidding very rapid rate, like almost before they say the amount, I've said another amount almost over the top of them, sort of like I certainly wouldn't use the term bullying, but it's almost like where I'm expressing that they've got no chance, because every time they bid, I'm going to just get one better. Yeah. And that amount will change to where my due diligence done as well. It could be simply it could be $10,000 or $20,000 if I know personally we're probably a long way away from securing the property, or it could be down to $1,000 or $500 bids. Right. Recently, I attended an auction where it started very strong, almost like, wow, we're up to my client's limit. So I needed to be very careful. So I was quite strong, but I had to wait till the auctioneer took my $500 bids. And no one's taking $500 bids early in the piece, because it just drags things out, and I understand that. So you've got to be aware of where the auctioneer is at emotionally as well, and where the auction itself is up to before you can start throwing in $100 or a $500 bid. And whether you drag that out to the last minute, because a lot of people get quite confused under pressure when the auctioneer is going 1, 2, and they never bring the hammer down. But people, their hand raises because they think that we're almost about to sell. For most part, with my experience, I know that's not the case, but I see it all the time. Okay, guys, is that the best we got today? Going once, going twice, 3 times, here we go, but the third time never comes down. And then they start the rhetoric again, right? Yep. The inexperienced tend to go, oh, and then, I don't want to miss out, and I see it all the time. So it's just that's where knowing the auctioneer comes into play. If you see that role play, and that's basically what it is a sales role play, you can work with that. And they're not about to sell the property, so you can either hold back, and most of my strategies are on the cautious side where I do hold back, and then I come in at the end, which is another great strategy that people can use, where if they've got a little bit in reserve, they can let it go down to the last minute. And that buyer who thinks he's just about to pop the champagne, and next minute, boom, and they look around and go, where did you come from? I didn't even know you were here bidding. And sometimes emotionally that can do some damage to people as well. And then quite strong from that point onwards, and they go, well, this guy wants it more than me. Yeah. And that could be in various amounts too. Sometimes it could be only 500, and then other times I might drop a big 5,000 or a 10 or a 15 just to blow them out the water, as long as we're all still within our boundaries, of course, our financial boundaries. So many strategies at play, but there's hopefully that may help a few people forming their own strategy if they want to go and represent themselves at auction, which is not ideal, but it happens every Saturday in the real estate world.
Yeah, really, and I certainly wouldn't recommend people be doing that. When it comes to having a buyer's advocate or a buyer's agent represent you just for, say, the auction, you've found the property. Of course, there's different models where an advocate might do some of the due diligence as well. But if it just comes down to the bidding, I mean, it's not, in my view, a prohibitive expense. And I think the difference between getting it right and getting wrong is way more expensive than the fee. But can you give us a bit of an idea in your experience about what people would charge?
Yeah, definitely. So, look, the industry itself is getting quite competitive. I may have mentioned in the last podcast, there were 3 or 4 of us 5-7 years ago. Now there's, I think, 30 or 35 in the Newcastle area. So caution to all those out there, definitely check on the experience level of the buyer's agent you're engaging. But to answer the question, Mike, I have 2 distinct services where people get me in early and they say, Dean, we've found the home, and I go in and I read the reports. I enter into the contract negotiations. So by the time auction comes around, if it does come around, which is another point, because when you engage someone like myself, we do have that ability, and I'm working on one as we speak, literally this morning, where the agents called me and said, Dean, we're at a number now where the owner's more than happy not to take to auction. Mm-hmm. I need some guidance on where your client's up to. So that one looks like it's going to sell a week prior to the auction, because there's vendors out there who love the auction process to get everyone quickly involved, but then they don't want the pressure of the day.
Fair enough.
So that's another point when you do engage someone experienced, that we do engage and for best word, we want to take it out early, we want to go to auction, and then there's post-auction negotiations as well. If I'm the only buyer on the day, do I want to put my hand up on the day? Or do I want to say, hang on guys, well, I might have some conditions that might not be conducive to auction, because it is, as people may or may not know who are listening, it's a no cooling off. Auction, there's no cooling off. It's a 66W, which means you're playing for keeps. So a lot of people get a little bit confused about that too. Auctioneer, there is no cooling off on auction day. But getting back to what you say, I think I love to get involved a little bit early, so at least I visit the property for an hour prior. But there is that other option where people say, Dean, I've found the home. I just want you to come on the day and be my emotional support so I don't pay too much. Yep. And those figures can start for as little as, I mean, I've seen some people do that for $1,500, you know. Right. Personally, you pay for what you get in this world. But either way, it's a very, very good cost-effective way that could save you far beyond getting emotional, or in fact buying the wrong property. Because many times I come along and someone says, Dean, I've found the property, and they just haven't done the due diligence required. And it's, are you aware of the easement, the flooding, the social housing, the this, the that? And they go, oh no, hang on a minute, whoa, I wanted to pay $1 million. That's changed the whole landscape. I wouldn't pay that for it at the moment. And so it's a bit of a necessary evil sometimes that I come in at an emotional time where they think they've found the one, and I say, guys, we can still have a go, but not quite the higher expectations of the vendor or the agent. So very good to get that buyer's agent in earlier. But on the day as well, it's an incredible. It amazes me, Mike. It amazes me that there's not more representation at auction. Like I do a fair bit. There's one or two others that have got enough experience to do it, but I am amazed that people still, for the sake of a few $1,000s or whatever, even if it was more, $5,000. At the end of the day, when property now, the basic property in this town exceeds $1 million. And way beyond, the percentage is very minor. So it's definitely worth considering getting someone on side if for any transaction, but particularly auction, where on the day emotions can take over, and not only can you pay more, but you just could buy the wrong property. And so that's the main thing where I step in, is guiding people on, is this the actual property you want and need, when they've got the the glasses and the blinkers on yeah. And they've got all those other sources, the family experts coming in who have bought one property in their life telling them, this is this and this is that. So always good to have somebody neutral like myself, not the agent. And most of my mates are all agents, don't get me wrong, and I know hundreds of them. However, when business is business and I'm working for my client exclusively, that all gets put aside. And you really, the benefit in having a buyer's agent is having that neutral opinion, and preferably a very experienced opinion, just to bring it back to reality for people. Because, most auction campaigns, as people know, are only a 3 or 4 week. So a house comes on the market, it's getting auctioned in 3 or 4 weekends' time. Yep. So people, need to be aware that time goes very quick in this modern world we live in. And before you know it, you're on the grass in the backyard ready to make one of the biggest decisions of your life. And I really, truly believe people should have, representation if they not so much if they can afford it, they're about to spend $1 million on a 2-bedroom cottage, so they certainly should be able to afford it. It's just a mindset thing. We look at the United States, for instance. There's no transaction, very rare transaction happens without a seller and a buyer's agent being represented on both sides.
Yeah.
And although we're getting close over here, I still think representation for the average purchase in Australia is down at around 21%. So that means only 2 out of every 10 properties being purchased has buyer agent, engagement, and that will rise. But people still need to do their due diligence, not on the property, but also on the buyer's agents they're considering engaging.
That's true. That's a whole nother episode. But you've given
That'll be our next one, I reckon. That's something we can definitely talk about. That's becoming more prevalent in the industry. With any new industry, you have people seeing the bright lights and the potential to make money. And there's businesses out there now doing quite well, trying to train up potential buyer's agents. And, that's a caution to all those out there. If you want to get represented by someone who's been in the game for a few weeks or months, good luck. I wouldn't advise that one.
Well, I'm inclined to agree, and you've given us plenty of food for thought on auctions and auctions strategy. Is there anything that we've missed, Dean, or something you want to give as a final tip to put a bow around it?
Look, I think like anything in life, knowledge is power. So if you haven't got time to do your due diligence, or pay somebody like myself to quickly do it, and I can turn a property around in a small amount of time. Within 24 hours, I can get most of the information I need to make a discerning decision on whether the property is a viable option to purchase. But people, I do see a lot of people being rushed into the process. And, I've been to auctions where somebody's walking their dog and go, hang on a minute, this looks good, I'll register, and they end up buying it. So believe it or not, I have seen that happen more than once in the 400 or 500 auctions I've been a part of. But it's so you can never predict it. So like anything in life, but what you can do for those listeners is do as much due diligence as you can, and that comes back to particularly due diligence on the property, but also a little bit on the auctioneer as well, which may just serve you well under pressure on how they operate. And but my biggest advice obviously would be to reach out and try and engage somebody that's experienced not only at auctions but who has purchased a lot of property in that area. I think is a big key.
I'm inclined to agree. I think that the stakes are far too high, and purchasing the wrong property is something that can make you stuck for the rest of your financial future. So I think you're preaching to the converted there, Dean. Thank you very much for sharing that wisdom today. There's a lot to unpack there, and I think a great little podcast for anyone to listen to if they are planning to head to auction in the next little while. You've given them heaps to work with. Thanks very much.
Thanks again, and look forward to seeing you next time.
See you then.